Welcome to North Stories. I've always thought that life had a way of surprising you when you least expect it, and in my case, those surprises came hard and fast. Looking back, it all started with a small decision, one that I didn't think would change my life so completely. But it did. And here I am, telling you how it all unraveled. My name is Angie, and for the longest time, I was just like anyone else. Working, struggling, trying to make things work in a world that didn't make it easy. It's strange, the way we end up on certain paths, isn't it? I never imagined myself in the world of pharmaceuticals. Hell, I didn't know the first thing about selling drugs. I wasn't some big shot salesperson or anything. I was just a woman trying to get by, trying to take care of my mother who was dealing with more health issues than anyone should have to, and trying to give my son a shot at a future I never had. But like I said, life has a funny way of pushing you in directions you never saw coming. It all started in Tampa, Florida. I was working as a waitress in a bar just off the highway, a place where regulars came to drink away their problems and truckers passed through, looking for a meal that didn't taste like cardboard. The tips were bad, the hours were long, and the pay barely covered rent. I couldn't keep up with the hospital bills for my mom, who was battling one illness after another. And every time I looked at my son, Kyle, I felt like I was failing him. It was like I was stuck in this loop, day in and day out, struggling to breathe under the weight of it all. Then one day, a guy came in. He wasn't the usual type you'd see in a place like that. Clean suit, expensive shoes, the kind of guy who looked like he could buy the whole bar if he wanted to. His name was Rick. At first, I thought he was just another businessman passing through. But after a few conversations and a couple of visits, he wasn't just some stranger anymore. Rick was charming, smooth-talking, and before long, he wasn't just sitting at the bar for drinks. He was there to talk to me. I can't explain it, but Rick saw something in me that no one else did. He said I had potential, that I was wasting my time slinging drinks when I could be doing something that would actually pay. He worked for a company, a new pharmaceutical startup, he said, and they were looking for people like me. People who could talk to others, who could sell. "You've got that look, Angie," he told me one night, his voice low, like he was letting me in on some big secret. "People trust you. That's what you need in this business." At first, I laughed it off. I mean, me? In sales? It was a joke. I barely knew how to sell a shot of tequila, let alone some fancy new drug. But the more Rick talked about the money, about how much people in his company were making, the more I started to listen. He wasn't just talking about a couple of extra bucks. He was talking life-changing money. Enough to pay off the hospital bills, enough to move out of the crummy apartment I was living in with Kyle, enough to give my mom the care she needed without having to worry about how to pay for it. And Rick made it sound so simple. The drug, he said, was a game changer. It was a pain medication, one that could help people who were suffering, people who didn't have any other options. He said it was going to revolutionize the industry, that it was safe and effective, and that all I had to do was get doctors to prescribe it. The more prescriptions, the more money I'd make. Simple. I guess desperation makes you blind sometimes. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that things could finally get better for once. So I agreed. I quit the bar and joined Rick's company, thinking I was about to turn my life around. And at first, it seemed like I had. They trained me, taught me everything I needed to know about the drug, which they called Oper. It wasn't long before I was in meetings with doctors, wearing the kind of clothes I used to dream about, making money that I had never imagined was possible. I was good at it too. Turns out, Rick was right, people did trust me. And I could sell. I could sell better than I ever thought I could. I became the top salesperson within a few months. The company loved me, and I loved the way my life was changing. I moved my mom into a better facility where she could get the care she needed. I got a nicer apartment for me and Kyle, closer to the beach, where he could play outside without me worrying about him. Things were looking up, finally. I had more money than I knew what to do with, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. But as I moved up in the company, things started to feel off. I remember the first time I heard a doctor ask me about side effects. It wasn't a question that came up often. Most of the doctors I worked with trusted the pitch, trusted me, and didn't dig too deep into the details. But this one, a guy named Dr. Patel, he wasn't like the others. He wanted to know more. He wanted to see the data, the studies, the long-term effects. I didn't have answers for him. Not really. I had the information they gave me in training, but the way he asked, it made me realize there were things I didn't know. Things the company didn't talk about. I brushed it off at the time, convincing myself that if there was something to worry about, they would have told us. Why would they keep it a secret? The drug was FDA approved, after all. It had to be safe. But the question stuck with me, nagging at the back of my mind. I started paying more attention at meetings, listening in on conversations I hadn't thought twice about before. I heard things, rumors, whispers about doctors who were starting to notice problems with Oprah. Patients were coming back, complaining about strange symptoms, about pain that didn't go away, even though they were taking the drug. Some of them were getting addicted. The company didn't seem concerned. They told us it was normal, that every drug had side effects, and that we were helping more people than we were hurting. It was a line they repeated over and over again. We're changing lives, they said. We're giving people their futures back. But the more I dug, the more I realized that wasn't the whole story. I started hearing from patients directly. People who had been on the drug for months, people who couldn't stop taking it even though it was ruining their lives. Some of them were losing their jobs, their families. Others were getting sicker, not better. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wanted to believe the company, believe Rick, when they said it was all under control. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And as much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was part of something terrible. That's when the nightmares started. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, haunted by faces I didn't even know, patients I had never met but who were suffering because of something I had sold them. I tried to push the guilt away, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. It kept coming, stronger and stronger, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to make a choice, keep climbing the ladder, keep making the money, and turn a blind eye to what was happening, or do something about it. But doing something meant risking everything I had built, the life I had finally started to build for Kyle, for my mom, for myself. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to make the right choice. But I knew one thing for certain, I couldn't keep living this life forever. And that's where things started to really fall apart. The guilt was suffocating. I tried to carry on like nothing had changed, pushing myself harder at work, keeping my head down, and sticking to the script the company had given us. Oprah changes lives, I repeated to myself, to the doctors, to anyone who would listen. But every time I said it, the words tasted like ash in my mouth. I couldn't shake the nagging doubt, the creeping sense that I was part of something much darker than I ever realized. The company was growing, faster than I ever thought possible. New offices opened, new faces flooded the building, and the energy in the air was electric. Rick, of course, was at the center of it all. He was the kind of guy who could talk anyone into anything, a natural-born salesman with a smooth smile and a gleam in his eye that always made you feel like you were on the winning team. He had this way of making you believe everything was under control, like we were untouchable, unstoppable. And for a while, it seemed like we were. Sales were through the roof. The bonuses were rolling in. I was making more money than I ever thought possible, and Rick, well, he was living like a king. New cars, a beach house, fancy dinners with clients. I was getting invited to them, too. At first, it felt good, like I had finally made it, like I was someone important. I was rubbing elbows with people I used to read about in magazines, doctors with gold-plated reputations, investors with deep pockets. But behind all the glamour, there were cracks starting to show. It was subtle at first. A doctor here or there who seemed reluctant to keep prescribing Oprah. Patients who stopped showing up to appointments. And then, one night, after one of those fancy dinners, Rick pulled me aside. His smile was still there, but it was different, strained. I could feel the tension rolling off him, like he was holding something back. "Angie, we need you to step it up," he said, his voice low. "The numbers are good, but they need to be better. We're under pressure to expand faster. You're one of our best, and I know you can handle it. You've got what it takes." I nodded, but inside, my stomach twisted. I didn't need to be told what pressure meant in this business. The higher-ups were watching, pushing for more. More doctors, more prescriptions, more profit. It was always about more. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep climbing that ladder. A few weeks later, everything started to unravel. It was a Tuesday, the kind of humid Florida day where the air sticks to your skin, and I was sitting in my office, going over some sales reports when my phone rang. It was Dr. Patel, the same doctor who had questioned me months ago. I hadn't heard from him in a while, and something about the tone in his voice set me on edge immediately. "We need to talk, Angie," he said. In person. There was no mistaking the seriousness in his voice. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. I drove out to his practice the next day, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. But nothing could have prepared me for what he showed me. "Look at this," he said, handing me a stack of patient charts. His office was quiet, too quiet, and the weight of what he was about to tell me hung heavy in the air. "These are just a few of my patients who've been on OPR for the past 6 months. I skimmed through the charts, my heart racing. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. But then I saw it. One after another, the same symptoms. Increased pain, dependency, withdrawal, and worse, some of the patients were showing signs of irreversible nerve damage. "I've been tracking this for weeks," Dr. Patel continued, his voice tense. "It's not just my patients, Angie. I've spoken to other doctors. They're seeing the same thing. We were promised this drug was a breakthrough, that it would change everything. But it's not. It's causing more harm than good." I could barely breathe as the reality of what he was saying sank in. I felt like the ground was falling away beneath me. I had sold this drug to dozens of doctors. I had pushed it hard, convinced them it was the answer their patients had been waiting for. And now this? "I don't know how deep this goes," Dr. Patel said, leaning in. "But I've been hearing rumors. Some of the studies the company used to get FDA approval, they might not have been as thorough as they claimed. There's something going on here, Angie. I don't think we're being told the whole truth." My mind was spinning. If what he was saying was true, then everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, was built on a lie. I thought back to all the patients I had indirectly touched, the lives I had changed. I had believed I was helping them, but now it seemed I was only making things worse. "I can't keep prescribing this," Dr. Patel said, his voice firm. "I'm pulling all my patients off OPR immediately, and I'm going to the medical board with this. I don't care what the company says." He paused, looking at me, and I could see the question in his eyes. He wanted to know what I was going to do. Was I going to stand by him? Or was I going to stay loyal to the company that had made me rich? I didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. Leaving his office, I felt like I was walking through a fog. I barely noticed the traffic as I drove home, my thoughts racing. I needed to talk to someone. But who? Rick? No. He was the last person I could trust right now. The higher-ups? They would just tell me what I already knew. They'd spin it, reassure me that everything was fine, that we were helping more people than we were hurting. But I knew the truth now. There was no going back. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing down on me like a lead blanket. What was I supposed to do? If I blew the whistle, if I exposed the truth, I'd lose everything. The money, the lifestyle, the security I had worked so hard to build for Kyle and my mom. And worse, I'd be dragging Rick down with me. He had been my mentor, my friend. But at the same time, how could I keep selling a drug that was destroying lives? I thought about Kyle, sleeping in the next room. I thought about my mom, who depended on me for everything. If I made the wrong move, if I gambled it all and lost, where would that leave us? The next morning, I called Rick. I could hear the tension in his voice as soon as he answered. "Hey, Angie," he said, his usual charm nowhere to be found. "I was just about to call you. We've got a bit of a situation." I knew exactly what he meant. The company was aware of Dr. Patel, of course. They knew he was pulling his patients off the drug, and they were scrambling to do damage control. I could practically hear the gears turning in Rick's mind, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to shut it down before it got any bigger. "I'm on it," he said, his voice tight. "We'll handle Patel. Don't worry." "Rick," I hesitated, my throat tight. "What if he's right?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wasn't sure he was going to answer me. When he finally did, his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "Angie, don't start questioning things now. We've come too far for that. Patel is one doctor. We've got hundreds of others who believe in what we're doing. This drug is saving lives. Don't lose sight of that." But I had lost sight of it. Or maybe I had never seen the truth to begin with. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. I had to make a decision, and no matter what I chose, nothing was ever going to be the same again. The decision hung over me like a storm cloud. It felt like every choice I'd ever made had led me to this moment, and now I was frozen at the edge of a cliff, terrified of the drop. I couldn't bring myself to go back to work, not after what Dr. Patel had shown me, not after what Rick had said. Every time I thought about stepping foot into that office again, my stomach turned. I couldn't face the doctors, couldn't keep pitching the drug, knowing what I knew now. But I didn't know what else to do. My mind was spinning with questions, with fear. What would happen if I went public? If I spoke up? Would anyone even believe me, or would I just get buried under the weight of the company's influence? And what about Kyle? What about my mom? I had built this life to keep them safe, to give them a chance, and now it felt like all of it was built on a foundation of lies. Days passed, and I found myself slipping further and further into the shadows of my own mind. I barely ate, barely slept, just sat around trying to figure out a way out of this mess. Every time my phone rang, I flinched, expecting it to be Rick or someone from the company. But the calls kept coming, and the pressure kept building. Then one night, as I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed with a text. It wasn't from Rick or anyone from work. It was from Dr. Patel. "We need to meet again. Urgent." I stared at the message for a long time, the dread tightening in my chest. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend that this was all just a bad dream that I could wake up from if I just waited long enough. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Things were spiraling out of control, and whatever Dr. Patel had to tell me, it couldn't wait. The next day, I met him at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, far from the prying eyes of anyone who might recognize us. He looked more exhausted than the last time I'd seen him, his face drawn tight with stress. "There's something you need to know," he said, leaning in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been doing more research, talking to other doctors across the state. Ulper is a bigger problem than we thought. It's not just about the side effects, it's the dependency. I'm seeing patients who can't stop taking it. They're coming back for stronger doses, and when they try to get off it, they experience severe withdrawals. It's acting more like a narcotic than a regular painkiller." I sat there, stunned, as the full weight of his words hit me. I had suspected it before, had heard whispers about it, but hearing it confirmed like this, it was like someone had punched me in the gut. I thought about all the patients I had indirectly pushed this drug on. All the lives that were now at risk because of me. "There's more," Dr. Patel continued, his eyes flicking nervously toward the door, as if he expected someone to walk in at any moment. "I started digging into the clinical trials, the ones the company used to get FDA approval. I spoke to a few researchers who worked on the project. Some of the data was manipulated, Angie. They knew about the risks, about the addiction potential, but they buried it in the fine print. They didn't want it to slow down the approval process. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. The company had known. They had known all along, and they had lied to us, to the doctors, to the patients, to me. I had been their pawn, their puppet, selling a drug that was destroying people's lives while they sat back and counted their profits. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Because I can't do this alone," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "If I go to the medical board, if I blow the whistle, they'll bury me. They'll say I'm just one disgruntled doctor trying to stir up trouble. But if we do this together, if you come forward with me, we have a chance. People will listen to you, Angie. You're one of their top reps. You know the inner workings of the company. You've seen what they're doing firsthand." I felt like I was suffocating. Dr. Patel was right. I had seen it. But going public? Whistleblowing against a company as powerful as the one I worked for? That wasn't something you just walked away from. They'd come after me. They'd ruin me. They'd take everything I had. And worse, they'd take Kyle and my mom down with me. I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, shaking my head. "If I come forward, they'll destroy me." Dr. Patel reached across the table, his hand gripping mine tightly. "If we don't do something, more people are going to get hurt. More people are going to die. Is that something you can live with?" I stared at him, my mind racing. I didn't want to live with that guilt, but the fear of losing everything I had worked for was paralyzing. I thought about Rick, about how he had brought me into this world, how he had believed in me, mentored me. Could I really turn my back on him, on the company that had given me everything? But then I thought about the patients. The ones who were hooked on this drug, the ones whose lives were spiraling out of control because of something I had sold them. I thought about Kyle, and what kind of example I was setting for him if I stayed silent. "I need time to think," I said finally, pulling my hand away from Dr. Patel's. "This is a huge decision. I can't just..." Before I could finish, my phone buzzed again. Another text. This time from Rick. "We need to talk. Now." I stared at the message, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. Rick never used to text like that. He always called. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Dr. Patel watched me, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" "It's Rick," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He knows." Dr. Patel's face tightened. "Be careful, Angie. They're going to do everything they can to cover this up. Don't let them scare you into silence." I nodded, but inside I felt like I was being pulled in two different directions. On one side, the weight of the truth was dragging me down, pulling me toward Dr. Patel and the responsibility to make things right. On the other side was Rick, the company, the life I had built, everything I stood to lose if I chose to fight this. I left the coffee shop in a daze, barely aware of my surroundings as I drove back toward the office. The closer I got, the tighter the knot in my stomach grew. Rick had always been in control, always one step ahead. But now, for the first time, it felt like he was slipping, and I didn't know what that meant for either of us. When I walked into the office, Rick was waiting for me in the conference room, the blinds drawn tight, the air thick with tension. He didn't smile when I walked in. In fact, he barely looked at me. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low, his eyes dark. "Patel's been stirring up trouble. He's talking to other doctors, trying to turn them against us. He's making wild accusations about Oprah, saying it's addictive, dangerous." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on me. This was it. This was the moment. I could feel it. "I need to know where you stand, Angie," Rick said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Are you with us, or are you with him?" The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick and heavy. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, could feel the sweat forming on the back of my neck. Rick was waiting, watching me, and I could see the expectation in his eyes. He was betting on my loyalty, counting on the fact that I wouldn't turn against him. But I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. Rick's question hung in the air like a noose tightening around my throat. Every second of silence made the tension worse, and I could see it in his face, the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes narrowed just slightly. He was waiting for me to fall in line, to reassure him that I was still loyal, still part of the team. The old Angie, the Angie that Rick had groomed, mentored, and turned into one of the company's top salespeople, would have given him what he wanted. Without hesitation, without question. But I wasn't sure I could be that person anymore. "I'm with you," I said finally, the words tasting like sand in my mouth. It was the lie I needed to tell in that moment, and maybe it was true. Or maybe it wasn't. I didn't know anymore. I just knew I wasn't ready to tip my hand, not yet. Rick's eyes softened slightly, and I could see the relief wash over him, though it was quickly replaced by a look of quiet determination. He stood up, pacing the length of the room like a caged animal, his mind already working on the next steps. That was Rick, always 10 steps ahead, always planning, always manipulating. "Good," he said, nodding to himself as if confirming what he already believed. "That's what I thought. We're in this together, Angie. You and me. We built this from the ground up, and I'm not about to let some disgruntled doctor tear it all apart." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes sharp, calculating. "We need to shut Patel down. He's talking to the wrong people. If this spreads, if more doctors start pulling their patients off Oprah, the whole thing could blow up in our faces." My stomach churned at the thought. Rick didn't say it directly, but I knew what he meant by shut Patel down. This wasn't just about refuting his claims. It was about discrediting him, making sure no one took him seriously. It was about protecting the company at all costs, even if that meant destroying a man's reputation in the process. "And what if Patel's right?" I asked quietly, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. Rick's face darkened, his eyes flashing with something that looked like anger, but maybe it was fear. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look uncertain, like he wasn't entirely sure of his own words. "He's not," Rick said, his voice firm. "This drug is saving lives, Angie. Sure, there are side effects, every drug has them. But think about all the people who've been helped, who are living pain-free because of Oprah. You've seen the success stories. You've met the patients. We're doing more good than harm, and that's what matters." I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to believe that all the pain and doubt I was feeling was just a misunderstanding, that Rick was right and that the good outweighed the bad. But I couldn't shake the image of those patient charts from Dr. Patel's office, the signs of addiction, the worsening symptoms. I couldn't shake the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest ever since I had learned the truth. But I kept quiet. I wasn't ready to challenge Rick, not yet. Not until I had more to go on. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, forcing a steady tone. Rick seemed to relax at that, his usual confidence slipping back into place. "I need you to do what you do best. Get out there, meet with your doctors, and reassure them. Remind them why they started prescribing Oprah in the first place. We need to keep the momentum going, keep the sales strong. If Patel's whispers start spreading, we'll be ready with our own story, one that paints him as a disgruntled outlier." I nodded, though inside I felt a growing sense of dread. I knew what Rick wanted. He wanted me to smooth things over, to convince the doctors that everything was fine, that Oprah was still the miracle drug we had promised it was. He wanted me to keep playing my role, keep selling the lie. But as I left the office that day, my mind was already elsewhere. I had told Rick I was with him, and maybe on the surface I was. But something had shifted inside me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the charade. Over the next few days, I threw myself back into work. I met with doctors, pitched the same polished story about Oprah, gave the same reassurances that everything was under control. On the outside, I was the Angie they all expected, the successful, confident rep who believed in the product, who believed in the company. But inside, I was unraveling. Every meeting felt like a performance, every conversation layered with guilt and doubt. The more I tried to push the drug, the more I felt like a fraud. And the more I felt like a fraud, the more I realized I couldn't keep doing this. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. I was sitting in my car outside one of the clinics I worked with, going over my notes for the next day, when my phone rang. It was Dr. Patel. "Angie," he said, his voice tense. "There's something you need to see. Meet me at my office." I hesitated, my mind racing. Meeting with him again felt dangerous, like I was walking a tightrope between two worlds, and one wrong step would send me crashing down. But something in his voice told me that this was important, too important to ignore. When I arrived at his office, he was already waiting for me, pacing back and forth in front of his desk. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him, more haggard, more stressed, like the weight of what he was uncovering was eating him alive. "Thank you for coming," he said, motioning for me to sit. I could see the fear in his eyes, the urgency. "I've found something big." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a stack of papers from a drawer in his desk and handed them to me. I glanced at them, my eyes scanning the text, but it was all medical jargon, numbers, charts. I couldn't make sense of it. "These are internal documents," Dr. Patel said, his voice tight. "I got them from a colleague who used to work for the company. They're the original clinical trial data for OPER, the real data. Not the sanitized version the FDA saw." I looked up at him, my hands shaking slightly as I held the papers. "What do you mean, the real data?" "I mean they knew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They knew about the addiction potential, about the risks of long-term use. They covered it up. They manipulated the data to make it look like the drug was safer than it actually is." The room spun for a moment, and I had to steady myself against the desk. This was it. This was the proof. Everything Dr. Patel had suspected, everything I had feared, it was all true. The company had lied. They had knowingly put a dangerous drug on the market, and I had helped them do it. "I don't know how deep this goes," Dr. Patel continued, his voice urgent. "But I'm taking this to the medical board. I can't sit on this any longer. People are dying, Angie. We have to stop this." I stared at the papers in my hands, my mind racing. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment where I had to make a choice. I could stay silent, let Dr. Patel go to the board on his own, and hope that the fallout didn't reach me. Or I could stand with him, blow the whistle, and risk everything, my job, my career, my future. But as I sat there, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, I realized something. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about my job or my career. It was about the people who were suffering, the patients who had trusted us, trusted me, to help them. I couldn't let them down. Not anymore. "I'm with you," I said finally, my voice steady. Dr. Patel looked at me, relief flooding his features. "Are you sure?" "I am," I said, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt certain. "We're going to stop them." What I didn't realize, though, was that the company wasn't going to let us go without a fight. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of my decision pressing down on me. Every part of me knew that I had crossed a line, one that there was no coming back from. My alliance with Dr. Patel had shifted everything. I had made a choice to stand against the company that had shaped my life for the last few years. The company that had lifted me out of the life I thought I was stuck in forever. But now, I was going to help tear that company down. I felt the cold grip of fear as I thought about what was coming. If Rick found out what I was planning, he wouldn't just come after me, he would bury me. And Rick, for all his charm and charisma, was ruthless when it came to protecting the company. I had seen it in his eyes, the way he had talked about Dr. Patel the other day, like he was just a problem to be eliminated. I was terrified of what Rick would do if he knew I was no longer on his side. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already being watched, that someone from the company was following our every move. Paranoia had seeped into every corner of my mind. I double-checked my phone, wondering if they had somehow tapped my calls. I changed my passwords, stopped using my work email, and deleted any messages between Dr. Patel and me. I even started looking over my shoulder every time I left the house, convinced I was being followed. It was like I could feel the company closing in, even though I hadn't taken any real steps yet. I met Dr. Patel again that afternoon in a park on the outskirts of town. It felt safer than meeting in a public place like a coffee shop. We could talk freely here, far from prying eyes and ears. "Did you bring the documents?" I asked, sitting next to him on a weathered wooden bench, trying to appear calm even though my heart was racing. Dr. Patel nodded, handing me a small folder. "I've copied everything I could get my hands on. These are just some of the trial reports and internal communications between the executives. It's enough to prove that they knew about the risks." I flipped through the pages, skimming the dense text. The documents detailed everything: side effects, addiction rates, even warnings from some of the original researchers that had been ignored. It was all there, laid out in black and white. The company had known, and they had pushed ahead anyway. And I had been their unwitting accomplice, selling the drug, building relationships with doctors who trusted me. "We need to get this to the medical board," Dr. Patel said, his voice low but urgent. "They can launch an investigation, stop the company before more people get hurt." I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead. I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The company had resources, connections. They could bury this if they wanted to. They could make us disappear, figuratively, or worse, literally. I had no illusions about the lengths they would go to in order to protect themselves. But still, we had to try. We couldn't just sit on this information and do nothing. People's lives were at stake. As we sat there, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A man, standing a few yards away, pretending to be on his phone but glancing in our direction too often to be coincidental. My heart lurched in my chest. "Patel," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the man. "We need to go. Now." Dr. Patel followed my gaze, and his face went pale. Without another word, we stood up and walked briskly toward the parking lot. I could feel the man's eyes on us, tracking our every move. The panic that had been simmering in the back of my mind was now boiling over. They were watching us. I didn't know how long they had been following us, but it didn't matter. We had to be careful now, more careful than ever. We split up at the lot, agreeing to keep our communication to burner phones. It felt extreme, like something out of a spy movie, but this was real. Too real. As I drove home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. My mind was buzzing with everything that had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about that man. He was proof that the company was already onto us. That meant Rick probably knew something, or at least suspected it. It was only a matter of time before he confronted me directly, and I didn't know if I'd be able to keep my composure when that moment came. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the documents Dr. Patel had given me. They were spread out across my coffee table, damning evidence that could bring the company down. But I knew that having the truth wasn't enough. We needed to be strategic, to hit them where it hurt the most. I started making a list in my head of all the people I could contact: reporters, government officials, anyone who might take an interest in this story. I knew that going to the press was risky, but it might be our best chance of getting the word out before the company could shut us down. Suddenly, my phone rang. My heart skipped a beat as I saw Rick's name flash on the screen. I hesitated for a second before answering. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Angie." Rick's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard. "Sure. What's up?" "Not over the phone," he said. "Come to the office. We'll talk in person." My blood ran cold. I could feel the trap closing in around me. Rick knew something. He wouldn't be calling me in for a casual chat. "I'm kind of tied up right now," I lied, my mind scrambling for an excuse. "This can't wait," Rick said, his voice firm. "Come by in the morning. We'll figure this out." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, my heart racing. Rick wasn't asking, he was ordering. And I knew that whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be good. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions churning inside me. Fear, anger, guilt. It was all tangled up in a knot that I couldn't untie. My mind kept replaying the moments of the last few days, the conversations with Dr. Patel, the man watching us in the park, the documents that now felt like a ticking time bomb in my hands. I headed to the office with a sense of dread so heavy, it felt like I was walking into my own execution. When I arrived, Rick was waiting for me, standing by the window with his back to the door. The blinds were half drawn, casting long shadows across the room. He didn't turn around when I entered. "Close the door," he said, his voice low and measured. I obeyed, my stomach twisting in knots. This was it. This was the confrontation I had been dreading. "Angie," Rick said, finally turning to face me, his expression unreadable. "We need to have an honest conversation." I didn't respond. I just stood there, waiting for the hammer to drop. Rick walked over to his desk and leaned against it, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I've been hearing some things," he said slowly. "Things about you and Patel. About what you two have been up to." I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my expression neutral. "What things?" I asked, playing dumb. Rick's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me, Angie. We've known each other too long for that. You've been poking around where you shouldn't, asking questions, meeting with people who aren't exactly friends of the company. I don't need to spell it out for you." My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm just doing my job, Rick. Meeting with doctors, staying on top of things." He shook his head, his lips pressing into a thin line. "No, you're doing more than that. You're digging. And now you're in way over your head." The room felt like it was closing in on me. I could feel Rick's gaze boring into me, could feel the weight of his words, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rick's expression softened slightly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "That depends on you, Angie. You're a smart woman. You've built a life here, a career. I don't want to see you throw it all away over some misguided sense of morality." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment where I had to choose. I could play along, pretend to be loyal, and maybe they'd let me walk away unscathed. Or I could stand my ground and risk losing everything. Rick pushed off the desk and took a step toward me, his voice soft but dangerous. "I'll give you one chance, Angie. Walk away from this. Stop talking to Patel. Stop asking questions. If you do that, we can forget this ever happened. You can keep your job, your life. But if you don't, I can't protect you." I felt the weight of his words settle over me like a shroud. Rick's threat hung in the air like smoke, wrapping around me, choking me. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, searched mine for any sign of weakness, any crack in my resolve. I knew he expected me to fold, to take the lifeline he was offering and walk away from this mess, pretending I had never seen those documents, never spoken to Dr. Patel. But I wasn't that person anymore. For years I had lived in Rick's world, played by his rules, convinced that what we were doing was for the greater good. I had built a life out of it, found a sense of worth in my success, and even justified my choices by focusing on the patients who benefited from the drug. But now I knew better. The documents from Patel, the addiction rates, the cover-up, it all pointed to a truth I could no longer ignore. My throat was dry, and I could feel my pulse racing as I stood in front of Rick, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. He was giving me an out. He was giving me a chance to walk away, to keep everything I had built. But deep down, I knew that if I took it, I'd be selling my soul in the process. The people who had been hurt by Oprah, the lives that had been shattered, it would all be on me. Rick stepped closer, his face only inches from mine, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "This is your last chance, Angie. Don't make me your enemy." For a moment, I thought about saying the words he wanted to hear. I thought about nodding, promising to stay quiet, and pretending that none of this had ever happened. But then, I saw the faces of the patients I'd met, the ones who had put their trust in me, who had looked at me with hope when I pitched Oprah as their salvation. And I thought about Dr. Patel, risking his career, maybe even his life, to expose the truth. I couldn't walk away from that. I took a deep breath and met Rick's gaze, standing a little straighter. "I can't do that, Rick." His expression didn't change immediately, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or disbelief. Then, slowly, his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Don't be stupid, Angie," he said, his voice still calm but laced with menace. "You think you can take us down? You think you and Patel are going to bring down the company? You have no idea what you're up against." "I know enough," I said, my voice steadier now. "I've seen the real data. I know what you've been hiding, and so does Patel. We're not going to let this go." Rick's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might actually lash out at me. But instead, he stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he regarded me with a new kind of intensity. "Fine," he said after a long pause, his voice icy. "You want to go down this road? Go ahead. But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked back to his desk, his movements controlled, almost robotic. He didn't look at me again as I left the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but it felt like a gunshot. As I walked down the hallway, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my legs unsteady beneath me. I had just declared war on the man who had once been my mentor, my ally. And I knew Rick wouldn't take this lying down. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every move I made was being tracked. I started sleeping with my phone under my pillow, waking up at odd hours to check for messages from Dr. Patel or my lawyer, any sign that the storm was coming. Patel and I agreed to meet only in public places, never the same spot twice. He was paranoid, more than ever, convinced that someone from the company was watching his every move. And maybe they were. He told me that he had submitted the documents to the medical board and that they had agreed to launch a preliminary investigation, but we both knew that wasn't enough. The board was slow, bureaucratic. It could take months, maybe longer, for them to act. By then, the company could have buried the evidence, or worse, buried us. That's when Patel suggested going to the press. I had been thinking about it for days but hadn't been brave enough to say it out loud. Going to the media was dangerous. More dangerous than anything we had done so far. It would mean putting ourselves directly in the crosshairs of the company's legal team, their PR machine, and whatever else they had at their disposal. But it would also mean getting the truth out there faster than any investigation could. "We need to control the narrative," Patel said, his voice tense as we sat across from each other at a crowded diner one evening. "If we wait for the board to act, they'll cover this up. We need to get ahead of it, make sure the public knows what's really going on before the company can spin it." I stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on me. He was right. The company had the resources to crush us in court, to paint us as disgruntled employees, to dismiss everything we were trying to expose. But if we went to the press, if we could get the story out there first, they wouldn't be able to silence us so easily. I nodded slowly. "Okay. Let's do it." The decision was made. We would go public. It was the only way to stop the company from controlling the narrative. Patel contacted a journalist he trusted, someone who had worked on whistleblower cases before, and we arranged a meeting. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I couldn't shake the fear that had taken root in my chest. We were stepping into dangerous territory now, and I knew there would be consequences. Rick wasn't the kind of man to let something like this slide. He would come after us, and I had no idea what he was capable of. The next day, I received a message from the journalist, a woman named Julia who worked for a national investigative news outlet. She wanted to meet us in a discreet location, somewhere we could talk freely without worrying about prying eyes. The plan was set in motion. But before we could meet with Julia, the first blow came. It was late in the afternoon when I got the call from Dr. Patel's assistant. Her voice was shaky, barely able to get the words out. "Angie, it's Dr. Patel. He's been arrested." My stomach dropped. What? Arrested for what? They're saying it's fraud, she said, her voice cracking. They raided his office, took all his files, his computer. They're saying he falsified records, misled patients about treatments. It's bad. The room spun around me as her words sank in. This was it. This was the company's move. They were going to destroy Patel's reputation, discredit him before he could blow the whistle. And if they succeeded, everything we had worked for would fall apart. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. They had gone after Patel, and I knew I would be next. I had to act fast. I called Julia immediately, telling her what had happened and that we needed to meet, tonight. She agreed, her voice calm but serious. Don't go home, she warned. Get somewhere safe. We'll meet in 2 hours. With my heart pounding in my chest, I grabbed a small bag and packed what little I could. I didn't know if they were coming for me next, but I couldn't take any chances. As I left my apartment, I felt the weight of eyes on me, the creeping paranoia that had been growing stronger each day. It wasn't just in my head anymore. They were closing in. The night air was thick with tension as I drove to the meeting spot, a small cafe on the outskirts of town where Julia had agreed to meet us. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car tailing me, but the streets were quiet. Too quiet. When I arrived at the cafe, Julia was already there, sitting in a back corner booth with a laptop in front of her. She looked up as I walked in, giving me a small nod of acknowledgement. She was younger than I had expected, maybe in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. I sat down across from her, my nerves buzzing. Julia didn't waste any time. I heard about Patel, she said, her fingers tapping lightly on the keyboard in front of her. They're trying to take him down before he can talk. Classic move. But that's not going to stop us. We're still going to get this story out. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. What do we do now? Julia leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. We're going to expose them, Angie. We're going to take everything they've done and put it on the front page. But first, we need to be smart. We need more than just your word and Patel's. We need something undeniable, something they can't sweep under the rug. I knew exactly what she was asking for. The documents. The proof that had been sitting in my apartment, the ones Patel had given me. If I handed them over, there would be no going back. This would be the point of no return. I took a deep breath, knowing the decision I was about to make would change everything. Those documents were the key to the entire case, and once they were in Julia's hands, there would be no turning back. If we succeeded, we could bring down the company, expose the truth about Oprah and the lives it had destroyed. But if we failed, if they found a way to silence us, then I would lose everything. My career, my reputation, my safety. I could see Julia watching me, waiting for my answer. Her sharp eyes, filled with a quiet determination, didn't waver. She had seen this kind of battle before, understood the stakes as well as I did. She was the kind of person who wouldn't back down, no matter what. I have them, I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. The documents. Everything Patel gave me. It's enough to prove they knew about the side effects and covered it up. Julia nodded, her expression unwavering. Good. But we'll need more. We need voices. Doctors, patients, people who were affected. You've been on the inside, Angie. You've built relationships with these doctors. Do you think you can get any of them to talk? I swallowed hard. The doctors I had worked with, the ones I had convinced to prescribe Oprah, would be putting themselves at risk if they spoke out. Many of them had benefited financially from their association with the company, and exposing the truth would mean admitting they had been part of a system that harmed people. It wouldn't be easy. I can try, I said, though I wasn't sure how many of them would be willing to go on record. There are a few who might talk, especially now that they've seen the damage Oprah has caused. Julia's fingers moved swiftly over her keyboard as she jotted down notes. We'll start with that. Get as many of them on record as you can. We'll also need patient testimonies, people who were prescribed the drug and experienced the side effects. The more voices we have, the harder it will be for the company to discredit us. I nodded, my mind already spinning through a list of names. There were a few patients I remembered clearly, the ones whose cases had kept me up at night long after I had realized what Oprah was doing to them. I could only hope they'd be willing to talk. Julia looked at me, her gaze softening slightly. I know this isn't easy. You're risking everything to do the right thing. But I promise you, we're going to make sure the truth gets out. The company won't get away with this. I wanted to believe her, but the weight of everything we were up against still hung heavily on my shoulders. Rick, the company's legal team, their endless resources, it felt like an unstoppable machine, and we were two people trying to take it down with nothing but words and a few pieces of paper. But I had come too far to back down now. Okay, I said, my voice stronger this time. I'll get the documents and start reaching out to the doctors and patients. Julia nodded, her fingers tapping out a quick message on her phone. We'll also need to get ahead of the company's response. They'll come after us hard once we go public, so we need to have our defense ready. I've got a legal team that's worked on whistleblower cases before. They'll help protect us. As she spoke, I felt a sliver of hope creep into the pit of my stomach. Maybe, just maybe, we could pull this off. Maybe we could take them down. But that hope was quickly shattered by a phone call that came in just as I was leaving the cafe. It was from my lawyer, an older man named Greg who had helped me out with a few minor legal issues over the years. He had never sounded rattled before, but now, there was a tension in his voice that made my blood run cold. Angie, Greg said without any preamble, you need to come to my office. Now. What's going on? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been bracing for a move from the company, but I hadn't expected it to come so soon. They've filed a lawsuit against you, Greg said, his voice tight. Defamation, breach of contract, and theft of proprietary information. They're coming after you with everything they've got. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, the weight of the company's legal machine crushing down. I had expected them to fight back, but I hadn't anticipated it would happen this fast, or this hard. I'm on my way, I said, hanging up and hurrying to my car. As I drove, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. This lawsuit was meant to intimidate me, to make me second-guess what I was doing, and to crush me before I could expose them. They were trying to bury me in legal fees and court battles, tie me up in so much red tape that I couldn't focus on the bigger picture. And worst of all, they were accusing me of stealing the very documents that proved their wrongdoing. When I arrived at Greg's office, he was already waiting for me in the conference room, a stack of legal papers spread out on the table. His usually calm demeanor was strained, his forehead creased with worry. They're not messing around, Greg said as I sat down. They've got a team of corporate lawyers ready to tear you apart. This isn't just about stopping you from going public. They want to ruin you. I stared at the papers, feeling the weight of the words on the page. They were accusing me of stealing confidential information, of breaching my non-disclosure agreement, and of defaming the company's reputation with lies. They were turning the narrative around, making me the villain in the story. What are my options? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. We can fight it, but it's going to be expensive, and they know that. They're hoping to drag this out, make it so difficult for you that you'll give up. I felt the weight of the situation settle over me like a suffocating blanket. They weren't just coming after my career, they were coming after my life. If I lost this lawsuit, I would be ruined, financially and professionally. Everything I had worked for would be gone. But then I thought about the patients, the doctors who had trusted me, the lives that had been destroyed by Oprah. And I thought about Patel, sitting in a jail cell because he had dared to speak the truth. I couldn't walk away now. I couldn't let them win. We fight, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I'm not backing down. Greg looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But we're going to need help. A bigger legal team, media support, everything we can get. They're going to come at you from every angle, and we need to be ready. As I left Greg's office, I felt the weight of what was coming crashing down on me. The company was going to throw everything they had at me, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to withstand it. But I couldn't let them silence me. Not now. That night, I met Julia in a quiet hotel room, far from prying eyes. I handed her the documents, the evidence that could take down the company. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages, her face growing more serious with each passing moment. "This is it," she said, her voice hushed with a mixture of awe and fear. "This is what we need to blow the whole thing open." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. The documents were out of my hands now. There was no going back. But just as Julia was about to leave, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression darkening. "They know," she said quietly, showing me the screen. It was a message from one of her contacts, warning her that the company had gotten wind of the investigation. They were gearing up for a full-scale media assault, ready to paint me and Patel as disgruntled employees out for revenge. The lawsuit was only the beginning. "They're coming for us," Julia said, her voice grim. "This is going to get ugly." I nodded, the fear rising in my chest again. But I couldn't let it stop me. Not now. "We keep going," I said, my voice resolute. "We get the story out, and we let the world see what they've done." Julia gave me a small, determined nod. "I'll get the story ready. But you need to be careful. They'll come after you harder now that they know you're not backing down." I knew she was right. The company would stop at nothing to protect itself, and I was standing directly in their path. As Julia left the room, I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the city lights outside the window. The battle was just beginning, and I had no idea how it would end. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. The morning after Julia left, the gravity of everything settled deep in my bones. The lawsuit, the media assault, they were no longer distant threats. They were real, immediate, and closing in faster than I had anticipated. As I sat alone in the hotel room, the soft hum of the city outside felt distant, like I was somehow removed from it, trapped in a bubble of dread. I checked my phone, expecting some news, an email from Greg, or a call from Julia, but the screen remained dark. A part of me was relieved by the silence. It gave me time to think, to plan my next move. But deep down, I knew that the quiet wouldn't last long. The storm was coming, and I had to be ready. My thoughts kept circling back to Dr. Patel. The image of him being arrested haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him somehow. He had been the first to sound the alarm, the first to dig into the truth, and now he was paying the price for it. The company had turned him into their scapegoat, and it wouldn't be long before they came after me just as hard. I had to find a way to help him. He had risked everything for the truth, and I couldn't let him go down without a fight. I grabbed my phone and called Greg. He picked up on the second ring, his voice still tinged with the tension that had been present since the lawsuit was filed. "Angie, I was about to call you. We've got a serious problem," he said, skipping the pleasantries. I swallowed hard. "What now?" "The company's legal team has escalated. They're pushing to get the documents you gave Patel ruled as inadmissible in court. If they succeed, the evidence won't just be ignored, it'll be wiped from the record. Patel's case will crumble, and we'll lose the leverage we have against them." My heart sank. They were trying to bury the evidence before it could see the light of day. If the documents were thrown out, everything we had would be for nothing. "Is there anything we can do to stop them?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. Greg sighed. "I'm working on it, but we'll need to bring in experts, people who can testify to the authenticity of the documents and show that they're not fabricated. The company's lawyers are claiming Patel tampered with the data, that the records were manipulated to make them look worse than they are. It's a typical strategy, but if we don't move quickly, they might get away with it." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Every time I thought we had made progress, the company found a way to strike back harder. But I couldn't give up now. Not with so much at stake. "I'll reach out to Patel's contacts," I said after a moment. "There are other doctors who know about the data, who can back up what we found. Maybe they'll be willing to come forward. Greg hesitated. Be careful, Angie. The company has eyes everywhere. If they catch wind of you talking to anyone, they'll go after them too. They're already trying to ruin Patel's career. You don't want to drag anyone else down with you. I know, I said quietly, the knot in my stomach tightening. But we need all the help we can get. After I hung up with Greg, I sat for a moment, staring at my phone, wondering who I could turn to. The doctors who had once praised Oprah for its effectiveness were now either silent or distancing themselves from the scandal. Many of them had received financial incentives from the company to push the drug, and they wouldn't want to risk their reputations, or their profits, by speaking out. But there was one name that kept surfacing in my mind, Dr. Ellis. He was one of the few doctors I had worked with who had always been skeptical of Oprah's rapid rise. Back when I was still selling the drug, he had raised concerns about the lack of long-term studies, about the side effects that patients were beginning to report. I had dismissed his warnings at the time, chalking it up to his being overly cautious. But now, I saw that he had been right all along. I hadn't spoken to Dr. Ellis in months, not since I had left the company. Reaching out to him now felt like a long shot, but I had no other choice. I dialed his number, my heart pounding in my chest as the phone rang. Part of me expected him not to answer, to brush me off like so many others had. But after a few rings, I heard his voice on the other end. This is Dr. Ellis. Dr. Ellis, it's Angie Martin, I said, my voice steady but tense. I don't know if you remember me, but we worked together on the Oprah trials. There was a pause, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if he would hang up. I remember you, Angie, he said finally. His tone wasn't exactly warm, but it wasn't hostile either. I've been following the news. That didn't surprise me. Oprah had become the center of a growing controversy, and anyone associated with it was under scrutiny. The media had started picking up on the lawsuits and patient testimonies, and the company was scrambling to contain the damage. I need your help, I said, deciding to get straight to the point. You were one of the first doctors to raise concerns about the drug. You saw the side effects, the patterns. We need someone with your experience to testify, to back up the data we have. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him weighing his options, considering what it would mean to get involved. I told you people from the beginning that something wasn't right, Ellis said finally, his voice tinged with frustration. But no one listened. Everyone was too busy chasing the money. I know, I said softly, guilt gnawing at me. I was part of that. But I'm trying to make it right now. We have the evidence, but the company is trying to bury it. They're going to destroy Patel's career, and I'm next. We need someone like you to come forward. We need your voice. There was a long silence on the other end, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. This was my last hope. If Ellis didn't agree to help, I wasn't sure where else to turn. I'll think about it, he said finally, his voice hesitant. But you need to understand, Angie, this isn't just about one drug. The whole system is broken. Going after Oprah is like cutting off one head of the Hydra. There will always be another drug, another company willing to take the same risks for profit. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But we have to start somewhere. Ellis sighed, and I could hear the weariness in his voice. Give me a few days. I need to look over the data and see what I can do. But don't expect miracles. I won't, I said, feeling a small flicker of hope in my chest. Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Really. When I hung up, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. Getting Ellis to agree to help was just the first step. The real fight was still ahead. A few days later, I received a message from Julia. She had started writing the story, piecing together the timeline of events, the patient testimonies, and the damning evidence Patel had uncovered. The company's PR team had already begun spinning their narrative, painting me and Patel as disgruntled former employees with a vendetta. But Julia wasn't deterred. She was pushing forward, determined to get the truth out. That afternoon, I sat down with Julia in a small, dimly lit room at her office. She had brought in her editor, a tall, thin man named Marcus, whose sharp features and intense gaze reminded me of a hawk. He was calm, collected, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes as he looked over the documents Julia had spread out on the table. "This is big," Marcus said, flipping through the papers. "If we run this story, it's going to blow up. But we need to be absolutely sure we've got everything nailed down. The company is going to hit back hard, and if there's even a hint that we've gotten something wrong, they'll tear us apart." "We've got the documents," Julia said confidently, her fingers tapping on the edge of the table. "We've got patient testimonies, and Angie's been working on getting doctors to corroborate the findings." Marcus nodded, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was already thinking several steps ahead, preparing for the inevitable fallout. "We're going to need more than just documents and testimonies," Marcus said after a moment. "We need a face. Someone the public can connect with. A patient who was directly affected by Oprah. Someone who can tell their story on camera." I felt a lump form in my throat. It was one thing to gather the evidence, to get the doctors and patients to talk in private, but asking someone to go on record publicly, to face the wrath of the company, that was a different level of risk. "I think I know someone," I said slowly, thinking of one patient in particular. Her name was Christine Parker. She had been one of the first patients I had pitched Oprah to, a young mother suffering from chronic pain after a car accident. At first, the drug had seemed like a miracle for Christine. Her pain had subsided, and she had been able to return to her life as a mother, working part-time and caring for her 2 young daughters. But not long after she started taking Oprah, things had begun to unravel. The headaches, the dizziness, the sleepless nights, symptoms no one could explain away. And then the addiction crept in, slowly at first, until Christine found herself needing more and more of the drug just to get through the day. I had stayed in contact with her for a while, even after I left the company. At first, it was out of guilt. I had been the one who convinced her to try Oprah, after all. But eventually it turned into something more. We had become friends in a way, bonded by the shared understanding that Oprah had destroyed more than just her health. It had taken pieces of her life. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Reaching out to ask her to come forward, to put her story on display for the world, felt like a betrayal of the trust we had built. But at the same time, I knew she was the voice we needed. Christine's story wasn't just another statistic. It was raw, personal, and undeniable. She had been one of Oprah's earliest success stories, and now, she was living proof of the drug's destructive power. I picked up my phone and dialed her number, my heart racing as I listened to the line ring. I half expected it to go straight to voicemail, or worse, for her to hang up when she realized it was me. But after a few rings, I heard her voice. "Hello? Christine, it's Angie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a brief pause, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice when she responded. "Angie? I haven't heard from you in a while. Is everything okay?" "I know, I'm sorry," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I've been dealing with a lot, but I need to talk to you. It's about Oprah." Another pause, this one longer. I could practically feel her hesitation through the phone. "I don't know, Angie," she said quietly. "I don't think I can do this again. Every time I think about what that drug did to me, what it's still doing to me, I don't know if I can handle it." "I understand," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I really do. But Christine, we're so close to exposing the truth. We have the documents, the evidence, but we need someone who can tell their story. Someone who's lived through it, like you have. If you're willing to come forward, it could make all the difference. We could stop them from hurting anyone else." I could hear her breathing on the other end, slow and deliberate, as she processed what I was asking of her. I knew it wasn't fair to put this kind of burden on her, to ask her to relive the trauma she had fought so hard to leave behind. But I also knew that her story could change everything. "I don't want to see anyone else go through what I did," Christine said finally, her voice shaky. "But I'm scared, Angie. They're a big company, and I'm just one person." "I know," I said gently. "But you're not alone. We're going to protect you." Julia, the journalist I'm working with, she's one of the best. She'll make sure your story is heard, and we'll have lawyers backing us up every step of the way. We can fight them, but we need your help." There was another long pause, and I held my breath, waiting for her answer. "Okay," Christine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. But only because I don't want anyone else to suffer like I have." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a sense of responsibility. Christine was trusting me to protect her, to make sure her story was used for good. I couldn't let her down. "Thank you, Christine," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "We'll take it one step at a time. Julia will reach out to you soon to set up the interview. You're doing something incredibly brave, and I promise you, we're going to make sure it counts." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of the hotel room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. We had a voice now, a face to put to the suffering caused by Oprah. Christine's story would be the heart of our fight against the company, but it also meant that the stakes had never been higher. The company wouldn't hesitate to destroy her if it meant protecting their profits. I had to be ready for that. Julia was thrilled when I told her the news. She immediately began setting up the logistics for the interview with Christine, making sure everything would be handled delicately and securely. We couldn't afford any leaks or missteps. Everything had to be airtight. The company's PR team was already on the offensive, flooding the media with positive stories about Oprah's life-changing benefits, and touting new studies that painted the drug in a favorable light. But once Christine's story was out, their spin wouldn't hold up. Days passed, and the tension mounted. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone from the company to show up at my door or for another lawsuit to land in my lap. But for now, things were quiet, too quiet. I knew it was only a matter of time before the company made their next move. Then, one night, as I was scrolling through news articles on my phone, I got a call from an unknown number. My stomach clenched. I hesitated for a moment before answering, my pulse quickening. "Hello? Angie Martin?" The voice on the other end was cold, professional. "Yes, this is Angie," I replied cautiously. "This is Tom Wexler. I'm with Hastings & Blake, the law firm representing Thermex Pharmaceuticals. I'm calling to inform you that my client is prepared to offer you a settlement in exchange for your silence regarding the Oprah case." I felt my blood run cold. A settlement offer? They were trying to buy me off. "I'm not interested," I said, my voice tight. Wexler continued as if he hadn't heard me. "We believe it would be in your best interest to accept this offer, Ms. Martin. It's a substantial sum, and it would allow you to avoid further legal complications. You've already seen what our legal team is capable of. This is your chance to walk away unscathed." My hands were shaking. "What about the patients? The people who've been hurt by Oprah? You think I can just walk away from that? We believe that everyone involved will benefit from moving on," Wexler said smoothly. "This case could drag on for years, and in the end, it may not go the way you're hoping. My client is offering you a way out, a way to avoid the personal and financial ruin that will almost certainly follow if this continues." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. They were trying to scare me, to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't going to back down now. Not when we were so close to the truth. "I'm not taking your money," I said, my voice firm. "And I'm not going to be silenced. You can tell your client that." There was a brief pause on the other end, and I could almost hear Wexler's icy smile. "I see. Well, Ms. Martin, I hope you understand the consequences of your decision. Good luck." He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at the phone, my heart racing. They weren't just offering me money, they were offering me a way out, a way to escape the avalanche of legal trouble that was about to hit me. But I couldn't take it. If I took their settlement, I would be betraying Christine, Patel, and everyone else who had suffered because of Oprah. I sat down, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me like a heavy cloak. There was no going back now. The company was coming for me with everything they had, and I had just made it clear that I wasn't backing down. A few days later, Christine's interview was filmed. Julia was careful to protect her identity, keeping her face shadowed and her voice slightly altered. But even through the haze of anonymity, Christine's pain was palpable. She spoke about the euphoria she had felt when Oprah first took away her pain, about the hope it had given her, and then the slow, horrifying realization that the drug had taken more than it had given. When the interview was over, Julia and I sat in silence for a moment, both of us feeling the weight of Christine's story. It was powerful, undeniable, and it would make an impact. But it also meant we were now standing directly in the path of a very dangerous machine. The company would stop at nothing to protect itself, and I knew the storm was about to hit. We just had to hold on long enough to weather it. After Christine's interview, everything felt like it was moving at a breakneck pace. Julia's team edited the footage with surgical precision, creating a narrative that was gripping, heartbreaking, and undeniable. As I watched the final cut, I could barely recognize the person I had once been, the one who had believed in Oprah's promise without question, who had convinced so many people to take the drug. Now, everything I had been running from was right there on the screen, reflected in Christine's words and pain. It wasn't long before the video went live. Julia's article dropped simultaneously, painting a picture of a company obsessed with profits and indifferent to the lives it was destroying. Christine's story was just the tip of the iceberg, but it was the one people needed to see. The response was overwhelming. Social media exploded, the hashtag Oprah scandal trending within hours of the release. People who had taken the drug, or knew someone who had, began sharing their experiences. Their stories poured out like a flood, each one amplifying the damage that was finally being brought into the light. The world was listening, and suddenly, the power the company had held for so long was slipping through its fingers. For the first time in months, I felt something resembling hope. But it was short-lived. A few days after the video went live, I got a call from Greg. His voice was clipped urgent. "Angie, you need to come to the office." Now. I could hear the tension in his voice, and it made my stomach churn. Without asking for more details, I grabbed my bag and rushed out the door, my heart pounding the entire way there. When I arrived, Greg was waiting for me, his face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. "They're coming after you, Angie," he said bluntly the moment I walked in. I felt a sharp pang of fear. "What do you mean? What are they doing?" Greg ran a hand through his hair, his frustration barely contained. "Thermex's lawyers just filed a motion to have all the evidence Patel uncovered thrown out. They're claiming he fabricated the data, that he tampered with the studies. And they're using your connection to him to paint you as an accomplice." I sank into a chair, my pulse hammering in my ears. "They're framing us. Trying to make it look like we're the ones in the wrong." "Exactly," Greg said grimly. "And they've got resources we don't. Lawyers, lobbyists, people who will say whatever they need to in order to protect the company. They're already planting stories in the media about how you and Patel are disgruntled ex-employees, how this whole thing is just a ploy for revenge. They're attacking your credibility." I felt like the walls were closing in. No matter how hard we fought, Thermex was always a step ahead, using every dirty trick they could to discredit us. I had known they would come after me, but I hadn't expected them to move this quickly or ruthlessly. "What can we do?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. "How do we fight back?" Greg shook his head, his expression tight with worry. "We're preparing a defense, but we're running out of time. The court's going to decide whether the evidence stays or goes, and if we lose, we're done. There'll be nothing left to stand on." My mind was racing, trying to grasp the enormity of what was happening. If Patel's research was thrown out, Christine's story would be weakened. Without hard evidence to back it up, the company could dismiss her as an isolated case, a tragic anomaly. Everything we'd worked for would fall apart. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "There has to be something else we can do," I said, my voice firm. "We can't let them win like this. There are too many lives at stake." Greg nodded slowly, though the exhaustion was clear in his eyes. "There might be one more play. But it's risky. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What is it? Greg hesitated, as if weighing whether to even tell me. Then he sighed. I've been digging through some old corporate filings, trying to find anything we can use against Thermix. And I found something strange. There's a name that keeps popping up, Carter Davis. He's listed as an independent consultant on several of their projects, including the early trials for Oper. I frowned. Carter Davis? I've never heard of him. Neither had I, Greg said. And that's what's weird. He's got no public profile, no history before his involvement with Thermix. It's like he just appeared out of nowhere. But I did some more digging, and it turns out he's connected to a few shell companies that have been funneling money to doctors and researchers in exchange for favorable studies on Oper. The room felt suddenly colder. You think he's the one who's been covering for the company? Falsifying the data? It's possible, Greg said. If we can tie him to the manipulated studies, we might be able to turn the tables on Thermix. But tracking him down won't be easy. He's buried deep in the shadows. I thought about what Greg was saying, the risks involved in going after someone like Carter Davis. But we didn't have a choice. If he was the key to Thermix's cover-up, we had to find him. Otherwise, everything would fall apart. Do you know where he is? I asked, my voice steady. Greg pulled out his phone and opened a map. Last I could trace, he's been bouncing between Miami and New York, but he's careful. Doesn't stay in one place long. I stared at the map, feeling the weight of what I was about to suggest. Then we find him. We confront him with what we know. Greg gave me a sharp look. Angie, this isn't like tracking down some sales rep. This guy is dangerous. If he's behind the cover-up, he won't hesitate to protect himself, no matter what it takes. You could get hurt. I knew he was right, but what choice did we have? If we let fear stop us now, Thermix would win. They'd sweep everything under the rug, and countless lives would be left in the balance. I'm not afraid, I said, though part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. But fear wasn't going to stop me from doing what was right. We're going after him, Greg. We have to. He stared at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. All right. I'll make a few calls. We'll need help tracking him down, and we need to be smart about this. If he gets wind of what we're doing, he'll disappear for good. We spent the next few hours pulling together every piece of information we had on Carter Davis. I called Julia, bringing her into the loop. She agreed to dig into her contacts to see if anyone in the media world had crossed paths with him. Meanwhile, Greg tapped into his network of legal and financial experts, hoping to uncover any further connections between Davis and Thermix. The tension was building, and I could feel the clock ticking down with every passing moment. Thermix was already preparing for a full-blown legal battle, and the public's attention was shifting rapidly. Christine's story had ignited a spark, but without concrete proof, the flames would die out quickly. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. I kept thinking about Christine, about Patel, about all the people whose lives had been wrecked by Oper. If we didn't find Carter Davis, the company would bury the truth, and we'd be back at square one. The next morning, Greg called me with a lead. We might have something, he said, his voice a mix of urgency and excitement. One of my contacts in New York just spotted Davis at a private event. It's a fundraiser for some political candidate, but it looks like he's been using it as a cover to network with powerful people. I felt a surge of adrenaline. When and where? Tonight. It's at a hotel in Manhattan. But it's an invitation-only event, high security. We can't just walk in. I gritted my teeth. Then we'll need to get creative. Greg didn't argue. He knew that time was running out just as much as I did. He agreed to arrange the travel and promised to meet me there. As I packed my bag, my nerves felt like they were on fire. This wasn't just about legal battles or corporate intrigue anymore. It was personal. If we didn't find Carter Davis and expose him, everything I had fought for, everything Christine and Patel had sacrificed, would be for nothing. By the time I boarded the flight to New York, my heart was racing, my mind running through every possible scenario. I knew we were walking into dangerous territory. Carter Davis wasn't just some shady businessman. He was the linchpin of a massive conspiracy. And if we got too close, there was no telling what he'd do to protect himself. But I couldn't back down now. Too many lives were on the line. And I was willing to risk everything to make sure the truth came out. The flight to New York felt interminable. As the plane cruised through the clouds, I replayed everything that had led me to this moment. Each twist and turn, every decision, and each person affected by Oprah's dark grip weighed heavily on my mind. I was consumed with the thought that this night might be the breaking point, our chance to uncover the truth and finally hold Thermex accountable. When I landed, I received a text from Greg, "Meet me at the hotel entrance at 7 p.m. sharp." No later. I felt a mixture of adrenaline and anxiety as I made my way through the bustling streets of Manhattan. The hotel loomed ahead, its lights glowing against the darkening sky. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. When I arrived, I found Greg waiting for me, his expression tense. "Okay, here's the plan," he said, quickly outlining our approach. "We're going to create a diversion near the main entrance. I'll cause a scene that draws security's attention, and while they're distracted, you slip inside. Once you're in, look for Davis. He'll likely be in the main ballroom." I nodded, trying to quell the nervous energy swirling in my stomach. "What if they recognize me?" "Stick to the crowd, keep your head down, and act like you belong there," Greg said, his confidence reassuring. "And if anything goes wrong, I'll be right outside. We'll regroup." As the hour approached, my heart raced, and I could feel the tension in the air. I watched as guests began to arrive, dressed in elegant attire, laughing and chatting. This was a world I never truly belonged to, a world where power and influence reigned supreme, and where people like Carter Davis thrived. At exactly 7 p.m., Greg executed his distraction, feigning an argument with a hotel employee just outside the entrance. The commotion drew a crowd, and with their attention focused on him, I seized my chance. I slipped through the revolving doors and into the hotel lobby, my heart pounding with each step. Inside, the atmosphere was lavish, filled with the sounds of clinking glasses and soft laughter. I walked purposefully toward the ballroom, scanning the crowd for any sign of Carter Davis. My instincts kicked in, and I felt the familiar thrill of the hunt coursing through my veins. I mingled with the guests, forcing myself to smile and engage in casual conversation while I searched for Davis. I was acutely aware of every eye that fell on me, every whispered conversation. I could feel the weight of my mission pressing down on me. After several minutes of searching, I spotted a figure standing at the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, with an air of confidence that marked him as someone important. He was tall, with dark hair slicked back and a sharp suit that screamed money. It had to be him. Taking a deep breath, I approached him, using the crowd to my advantage. As I got closer, I noticed his demeanor. He was charismatic, effortlessly charming those around him. I had to remind myself that this was the man behind so much suffering. "Mr. Davis?" I said, forcing a polite smile as I reached him. "I'm a big admirer of your work. I've read so much about your contributions to the industry." He turned to me, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "And you are?" "Angie Collins," I said, using the pseudonym I had carefully crafted for this mission. "I've been following Thermex's work for quite some time. I'm eager to learn more about your involvement with Oprah." His gaze narrowed slightly, but he quickly recovered, flashing me a charming smile. "Ah, yes. Oprah has been quite the breakthrough, hasn't it? It's nice to meet someone so enthusiastic about the industry." I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was assessing me, trying to determine whether I was a friend or foe. "What do you think of its impact on the market?" I pressed, keeping my tone light. Davis chuckled, his confidence unwavering. "Well, the market has its ups and downs, but Oprah is truly revolutionary. We're saving lives every day, and the numbers speak for themselves." I forced myself not to react. Every word out of his mouth felt like a punch to the gut, but I needed to keep him talking. "I've heard rumors about some challenges in the trials. Some people have raised concerns regarding the side effects. He waved a hand dismissively, the smile still plastered on his face. Every drug has its detractors. It's part of the game, you know? What matters is the greater good we're achieving. Are you sure that's all that matters? I challenged, trying to keep my voice steady. What about the people who have suffered from it? His expression shifted, just for a moment, revealing a flicker of irritation. We can't save everyone, Ms. Collins. But we have to keep pushing forward, for the sake of innovation. Is that what you tell yourself? I pushed, my heart racing as I felt the danger of this encounter grow. Do you ever think about the lives you're ruining along the way? He looked at me, the facade of charm slipping for just a moment. I think you should know your place, young lady. This isn't a conversation for someone like you. I felt a chill run down my spine. The warning in his tone was unmistakable. I'm just trying to understand the bigger picture, I replied, keeping my voice calm. You can't blame someone for wanting to get to the truth. His smile returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. Truth? It's a tricky concept. One person's truth can be another's downfall. I suggest you tread carefully, Angie. At that moment, I felt a surge of fear. I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, and he knew it. I needed to get out of there before he realized who I really was and what I was after. Before I could formulate a plan, I heard a voice behind me, and I turned to see Greg approaching. Angie, we need to. Davis's expression shifted to one of annoyance. You're interrupting a private conversation. Greg stepped forward, sensing the tension. I'm sorry, but I think we should take this discussion elsewhere. Davis's eyes narrowed, and I could sense the predator in him. Who are you? Just a friend, Greg said, trying to keep his tone non-threatening. Friends don't eavesdrop. Davis replied coolly, his gaze flicking between us. If you'll excuse me, I have more important matters to attend to. As he walked away, I felt the tension ease slightly, but I knew it was only temporary. I turned to Greg, my heart racing. Did you get anything? We need to regroup, he said urgently. Let's get out of here before anyone notices us. We slipped through the crowd, my mind racing. The encounter had given me more than I'd expected. It had shown me how closely Davis was watching his surroundings, how easily he could turn on me. If he figured out my true intentions, I wouldn't just be risking my job. I could be putting my life on the line. Once outside, we ducked into a quiet alley, the noise of the event fading behind us. What now? I asked, breathless. Greg pulled out his phone, his expression serious. We need to track Davis's movements. I have a contact who might be able to help us. If we can get proof of his connections to the shell companies, it could be the leverage we need against Thermex. I nodded, determination flooding through me. Let's do it. We can't let him slip away again. As we strategized, I felt the pressure mounting. The stakes had never been higher, and the company was already fighting back hard. We had to be quick and smart. With every passing moment, I could sense that Thermex was tightening its grip, and if we didn't move fast, we might miss our chance to expose them for good. The adrenaline coursing through my veins kept me focused, and I knew we were on the cusp of something huge. But I also knew that with each step we took, we were putting ourselves deeper into danger. We spent the rest of the night devising our plan, making phone calls and connecting with sources. It was a whirlwind of information, but each piece felt like a step closer to uncovering the truth. With every name we uncovered, every connection we made, the picture became clearer. Just as dawn broke, Greg received a call from his contact. I think I've got something, he said, excitement bubbling in his voice. Davis has been spotted at a diner in Brooklyn, meeting with someone who's been linked to the shell companies. Do you think we can get to him? I asked, feeling the thrill of the chase surge within me. I think we have to try, Greg replied. This could be our best chance yet to confront him and gather evidence. Let's go, I said, adrenaline surging through me once again. We quickly made our way to Brooklyn, the morning sun casting a warm glow over the streets. As we approached the diner, I felt a mix of fear and determination. This was it. We were about to confront the man who had played a significant role in the suffering caused by Oprah. We parked a few blocks away and walked toward the diner, keeping a low profile. The place was small and unassuming, a typical diner with vinyl booths and a flickering neon sign. As we stepped into the diner, the smell of coffee and grease enveloped us, a stark contrast to the high-stakes world we had been navigating. I scanned the room, searching for Carter Davis. There he was, sitting in a booth at the back, hunched over a plate of eggs and toast, deep in conversation with a man in a tailored suit. "Remember," Greg whispered, his voice low. "We need to be careful. We can't blow our cover." I nodded, my heart racing. This was our chance to confront him and gather the evidence we desperately needed to take down Thermix. As we approached the booth, I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear. The stakes had never been higher. "Mr. Davis," I said, forcing a polite smile as we reached their table. "Mind if we join you?" He looked up, surprise etched on his face, and then his expression hardened. "And who might you be?" "Angie Collins," I said, holding my ground. "We've heard a lot about you and your work with Thermix." Davis glanced at his companion, who quickly averted his gaze, sensing the tension in the air. "I'm busy," Davis replied curtly, trying to dismiss us. "This won't take long," Greg said, his voice steady. "We have some questions about your involvement with Oprah. We think the public deserves to know the truth." Davis's eyes narrowed, his demeanor shifting. "The truth? You two think you can just waltz in here and demand answers? This is a private conversation." I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. "This is about more than just you, Mr. Davis. It's about the lives you've ruined with Oprah. We know about the shell companies, the data manipulation. It's only a matter of time before it all comes to light." For a moment, he stared at us, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back, a smug smile creeping across his face. "You think you're the first to try to dig into my affairs? I've dealt with bigger threats than you. You have no idea what you're getting into." "Maybe not," I shot back, my confidence rising. "But we're not going to let you intimidate us into silence. This is about accountability, and we're not backing down." He chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "You're out of your depth, Miss Collins. You have no idea what's at stake here. I suggest you walk away while you still can." I felt a jolt of fear, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't let him see my doubt. "I'm not walking away," I declared, "and neither is Greg. We're here to get the truth, and we won't stop until we have it." Davis's expression hardened, and for a split second, I could see the threat in his eyes. But before he could respond, I noticed the door of the diner swing open, and a familiar face stepped inside, Julia, flanked by two reporters, their cameras ready. "Angie," she called, spotting me. "We heard you might be here." Davis's demeanor shifted again, this time to annoyance. "You're outnumbered, Ms. Collins," he said, glaring at me as he realized the tables were turning. I glanced at Julia, feeling a rush of hope. "Julia, we need evidence against this man. He's part of the operation that has caused so much harm." "Don't you dare," Davis hissed, leaning forward as if to shield himself from the growing attention. "You don't want to make enemies out of the wrong people. Is that a threat?" I challenged, keeping my composure. "Because right now, you're the one who has a lot to lose." Julia's reporters began recording, and she quickly introduced them to Davis. "Mr. Davis, I believe you owe the public some answers about your drug and its effects. The people deserve to know the truth about Oprah." The other diners were starting to take notice, their attention drawn to our confrontation. Davis's face twisted in anger, his facade cracking under the pressure. He shot a desperate glance toward the exit, but it was too late. The atmosphere had shifted. "Maybe you should consider your own career, Mr. Davis," I said, my voice steady. "People are waking up to the truth, and you won't be able to hide behind your connections forever." Davis's bravado faltered as he realized he was losing control of the situation. He pushed away from the table, standing up, and for a moment, I feared he might lash out. But instead, he glanced around the diner, weighing his options. The growing crowd was not in his favor. "You'll regret this," he spat, before storming out of the diner, his exit punctuated by the sound of the bell above the door. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, relief flooding through me as the tension broke. Julia and the reporters moved closer, eager to hear what had transpired. "What did he say?" Julia asked, her eyes wide with excitement. I recounted our conversation, detailing the threats and his evasive tactics. The reporters quickly began asking questions, and I could feel the weight of the moment. We had just confronted a powerful man, and his reaction spoke volumes about the fear he held. As the cameras rolled, I felt a sense of empowerment washing over me. This was what we had been fighting for, to expose the truth, to give a voice to those who had suffered in silence. With every word I spoke, I could see the ripple effect beginning to take shape. After the reporters finished their questions, Julia turned to me, her expression serious. "We need to get this out there as soon as possible. The public deserves to see this side of the story." "Absolutely," I replied, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "But we need to keep gathering evidence. Davis won't go down without a fight, and Thermex will retaliate." "We'll be ready," Greg said, determination etched on his face. "We have the momentum now. We can't stop until we bring them down." Over the next few weeks, the coverage exploded. Julia's team published articles detailing the confrontation at the diner, and the ripple effect of Christine's story continued to gain traction. People who had suffered from Oprah began coming forward, sharing their experiences and urging others to join the fight against Thermex. Greg and I worked tirelessly, digging deeper into the connections between Davis, Thermex, and the shell companies. With each new piece of evidence we uncovered, we felt the ground shifting beneath us, the walls closing in on Thermex. As the pressure mounted, we prepared for the inevitable backlash. Davis was still lurking in the shadows, and I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. But we were ready for him. In an explosive turn of events, we discovered that Davis had been implicated in multiple fraudulent studies tied to Oprah. With our evidence in hand, we went public, calling for a formal investigation into Thermex and the people responsible for the drug's devastation. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the industry. The backlash was swift, and the public outrage was palpable. Calls for accountability flooded social media, and pressure mounted for regulatory bodies to step in. Thermex scrambled to defend itself, launching counterattacks against us in the media. But the tide was turning. The truth was finally coming to light, and people were no longer willing to turn a blind eye to the suffering caused by the drug. As the legal battles unfolded, I felt a growing sense of hope. For the first time, it felt like we were on the right side of history. We were standing up for those who had been silenced, fighting for a future where accountability mattered. Months passed, and the investigation led to significant changes within the pharmaceutical industry. New regulations were put in place, and the clout that companies like Thermex had wielded began to diminish. Then, one day, as I sat in my apartment reflecting on the journey, I received a message from Christine. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. You've given us a voice when we felt voiceless. I'm getting better, and I can finally start to rebuild my life. I owe so much to you and Greg." Tears pricked at my eyes as I read her message. It was moments like this that reminded me why we had fought so hard, to bring hope to those who had lost everything. With the dust settling, I found a renewed purpose in my work. I joined an advocacy group, dedicated to ensuring that those affected by pharmaceutical injustices had a platform. Together, we were shaping a future where accountability and transparency were paramount. As I looked out over the skyline of New York, I realized that this fight wasn't just about one drug or one company. It was about the countless lives impacted by greed and negligence. I knew we had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I had found my voice, and I was determined to use it. And as I moved forward, I knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where we could change lives and make a difference for those who had been silenced for far too long.